his colleagues, he was subject to a target regime, which was introduced in the September of 2005. And they were targeted with weekly updates on what they got to achieve, and they were assessed against each other. Every man for himself had to try and achieve week in, week out. If they weren't achieving, they were pulled up by their supervisor.
Okay, and before we really go into the story, because I think it needs to be told, this culminated in a tragic event.
Couldn't cope with the targets, couldn't cope with the pressure, didn't feel he could approach his supervisor, and ended up that he couldn't speak to myself, wanted to protect me and the children from everything that was going off. And on the 6th of June 2006, he walked in front of a train at Morley because he couldn't take it anymore.
And his life ended.
Yeah.
Thank you. I realise this is extremely difficult. What I want to do is take you back a little bit to the months leading to those events. Events that you've kind of already briefly described. What was Ian like in the, say, 6 months prior to the events at Morley Station?
He, at work, he was downbeat, wasn't enjoying going into the office anymore, but when he came home, didn't want to talk about it. It was a separate life. I'm now home, I'm with the family, spending time with them, forget about work, deal with work at work.
And is that something he'd always been like, or was that a change?
I think that was a change. He did, as most couples do, have you had a good day? Yes, we dealt with this, no, there was this problem, that problem, the other. But generally, it was just chit-chat about work. But that did tail off in the days and weeks up to his death. Okay,
and can you remember anything specific in the months prior that stood out for you as a marked change in his behaviour?
He was quiet. He got a bit snappy with people, with us, people he loves, because we were the only ones that he could really speak to.
Yeah.
He didn't want to speak to anybody else about it. And I would go up to bed in an evening, he would stay down watching TV, reading a book, but he'd be having a glass of wine, but it went from a glass to 2 or 3, which I wasn't always aware of the amount that he was drinking, but it was obviously more than he had been in the past.
So, had he often had a drink at night at home, after work or on his rest days?
Yes, he would drink, but it was only casual drinking. You could never call it falling down. He was never getting drunk, or he was always able to take responsibility
just
for the
social
children
drink,
in the morning.
as
A social drink, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then I think you found something that kind of changed your perception a bit. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, he, tidying out the kitchen one day and going through to see what shopping we need, and I find a bottle of wine in a cupboard, which shouldn't have been there at all. So the immediate thing is, why is this here? Who's put it there? It's not me. The children are too young. It must be Ian.
And how long prior to his death would this have been?
It will be within three months or so.
And did you question Ian about
Yes.
wine? And what did he say?
He was apologetic for drinking without me knowing that he was drinking that much. When I quizzed him as to why, the story starts to come out.
What did he
There's
say?
pressure at work. He's not achieving the targets, and he's feeling the pressure. It's everyone for himself.
What did he actually say about the targets?
They were unachievable. Totally unachievable. When I pressed him on one in particular, it was a terrorism stop search.
Okay.
And he got to achieve, I can't remember the exact figures, but it was several a week.
Okay.
When I said, how many have you done before? In 16 years, I've done 1. I said, and why did you do that? Because I got reason to stop. And the others, he said, I'm just having to stop people because it's a target. And I don't believe in it because I don't feel I've got grounds.
Did he tell you when this regime of chasing targets came in?
Yeah, well, he said it had started sort of before Christmas. And with hindsight, I found out it was actually September. So he'd been coping with this. It had been getting worse from September 2005 onwards. So I found out sort of March, April time.
And I think this relates to the members of staff, the police officers who were working out of Sheffield, British Transport Police Station.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Did he begin to tell you anything else?
He was shutting down. He really did not want to talk about work at all. So rather than discuss work, it was, let's forget about it. I don't want to talk about it. He did say he'd got problems. You know, he felt he couldn't go to a supervisor.
Why was that?
Because the supervisor was assessing him week in, week out, and wasn't the most supportive to any of the colleagues. But Ian found it particularly difficult.
What did he find that was unsupportive?
He wasn't interested in the concerns that Ian had over what he was trying to achieve. They didn't really talk to each other. Quite often, they weren't even on the same shift, so Ian didn't have the opportunity to speak to him. It would be either a phone call or an email, which he didn't want to do.
Okay, so having found the bottle of wine and he was apologetic, he mentions the pressure that he's under. How does that affect you?
It makes me very sad, for one, that Ian can't confide in me. Angry that the job is making him feel so upset. And just let down by the whole situation. He could have had the support, but he felt it wasn't there. And I feel now that we weren't there for him, but he was protecting us. So he didn't want to burden me, because we've got 2 young children as well. And
how old were the children at the time?
At the time, my daughter was 6 when he died, and my son was 3.
So 2 very young children.
Very young children, and the youngest doesn't remember.
Now, am I right in thinking that the British Transport Police have a yearly appraisal for officers that's called a PDR, Personal Development Review? Okay. Now, I think that runs 12 monthly from April to April. So in the period from April 2005 to April 2006, what was his evaluation?
He had a good appraisal. It was a really good appraisal.
Okay.
There were no issues on it at all. He actually was a tutor constable, which means that he trained up-and-coming officers.
Yeah.
So he was doing that.
Position of responsibility.
Position of responsibility, yeah. He also had his competency pay signed off for a further year, which entails proving your ability within the job.
So you reach a certain level and then you get competency-related pay? So
long as your senior supervisor says, yeah. And that was signed off with no issues whatsoever. So we can say that as of April 2006, he was a competent tutor constable. Absolutely.
Okay?
Yes.
But something changed.
Yeah.
When did something change?
Well, Ian came home just over 2 weeks later, about the 15th of May, with an email that he received from his immediate supervisor at Sheffield.
Okay.
And attached to that was an action plan.
Which said what?
Which basically said that Ian was not achieving the targets that had been set in the September, that he needed to up his game, and that he had to report in on a weekly basis with his supervisor. And
how did that affect Ian?
He was devastated. Absolutely devastated. To get it without any prior knowledge. There was no verbal communication between the two to say that in the supervisor's opinion he thought things were bad.
There was no advance warning that things were going on?
Whatsoever. Okay. And he received it in an email. So there was the first thing he sees is when he opens the inbox is an email with an action plan. So the supervisor didn't even discuss it with him? No.
And obviously that's a bit surprising because Ian had been signed off literally a few weeks earlier.
Absolutely.
As saying that your work was fine and you're getting competence-related pay and that you're a tutor constable, so you're a good egg.
Yeah, that's right.
So what changed?
You tell me.
But that obviously, impacted on Ian in a great way.
Absolutely.
Because he
Yes, he was a very proud person. He took great pride in his work.
Yeah.
He loved the job, but to suddenly be faced with
he kind of ran into a brick wall then.
Yeah.
Had he ever been disciplined before in that kind of way?
No.
Never been put on an action plan before?
No.
Okay. And he'd never been brought in for an interview to say you're not doing well enough?
No.
So this comes as an almighty shock to Ian,
Yeah.
and presumably an almighty shock to you. How does it affect you?
Well, he brought this email home to show me because he was so aghast at it.
Yeah.
And I read it and thinking, this is not my husband this is talking about. This is just ridiculous. The manner in which it was written was very impersonal. It was written in the third person. It looked like it come out of a training manual, to be honest. And I was so angry, I wanted to go and confront his supervisor there and then.
What rank would his supervisor be?
He was a sergeant.
Okay. So the sergeant had had no prior interview with him on a personal one-to-one basis to explain what he was supposed to try and achieve. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ian was devastated.
Yeah.
And you were angry.
Yeah. See.
Let's move things forward slightly to, say, a week to 10 days prior to Ian's tragic passing. Was there anything that you remember in the days leading up to the event?
Other than Ian just not wanting to talk about work, the biggest thing was the difference in his temperament between work days and rest days.
And what difference was that?
Rest days, totally different person, full of smiles, having a laugh, enjoying time with the children. It was a gorgeous.
So he was relaxed, family man.
Yes, absolutely, devoted, and always was devoted family man.
Yeah.
And that never changed. And he adored taking them to school, picking them up, the whole dad thing.
And then the comparison to work?
It was almost Jekyll and Hyde.
Describe that for me.
Work, you mentioned work and what shifts are we on this week, and it's all almost like, without vocalising it, I don't want to go in. He won't want to talk about work around the children.
So, from the time when you found the bottle of wine, which shouldn't have been there, and when you questioned him about it, and he was apologetic, and it gave you a hint that things were going on, but he didn't really want to talk to you about it, so that excluded you, so you felt bad.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to support him, but you're saying that he wouldn't let you in. But when he was on his rest days, he was the perfect family man, husband, and loved playing with the children.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move it forward again, and I realise this is difficult to speak about. But did anything happen in the day prior to his death?
That was Monday. He died on the Tuesday. Monday, I went to work. With Ian's shift patterns, every now and again there was a clash. So I would swap my regular work day.
Okay.
So I went to work on the Monday the 5th of June. And Ian stayed at home, and my son was not at nursery then. Daughter was in school, so he had responsibility for them. Spoke to him from work a couple of times during the day, as we often did. And everything was fine.
On the telephone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always. Every day we'd speak on the telephone when the other was at work. Just, how's your day going?
Yeah.
Day was going well. Gorgeous day. We're thinking of doing barbecue, says Ian. Fantastic. We'll have a barbecue.
Okay.
So I come home, tea's ready, barbecue on the back garden. Lovely evening, couple of bottles of beer. Everything's fine, children put to bed. It was a case of, I was, thinking, right, long day, I'm going to go to bed, fine, no problem.
Okay. So what time do you go to bed?
This will be about 11 o'clock-ish, which is about normal time for us.
Okay.
Ian said, I'm going to stay, read a book, watch a bit of TV. which again is not unusual for Ian. You know,
Okay.
that's what he did. He enjoyed.
Okay.
And then about half an hour later, I've been reading my book in bed, and I hear the front door go. I think it's a bit odd.
Okay.
You know, what's happening? But then I hear a clanking of bottles. So
The sound of empty
The
bottles.
sound of empty bottles. So I
Okay.
look out the window, and Ian is going out of the house with empty bottles in a bag.
And where is he going?
I presume he's going to the bin. I don't know.
Okay.
To hide them somewhere is a presumption.
So you weren't aware of any empty
Because-
bottles then?
No, the only empty bottles were a couple of beer bottles, but when I look down from the bedroom window, there's more than a couple of beer bottles in the bag.
So he's got like a carry bag
He's
with
got a
some empty
carrier bag,
bottles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he goes off and does whatever,
Yeah.
comes back in, and what do you do?
I shouted from the window, "What on earth do you think you're doing? What is all that lot?"
So you opened your bedroom window?
Yeah.
And shouted down to him?
Yeah.
And what was his reaction when you shouted?
He looked like he'd been found out. You know, like,
Okay.
I've been caught.
And so what
What am I
happened?
going to do now? And he took the bottles, dumped them outside, came back inside.
And what happened next?
I came downstairs and we had a row.
About?
Because why are you drinking alone? You know, if there's a problem, we need to talk about it. What's the matter?
And what was his reaction?
He didn't want to talk. Just go to bed, leave me alone. Don't want to talk. And I don't know what else to do. I'm so angry with him at this point that I really actually don't want to talk to him. He doesn't
Because
really
he's
want to talk to me
excluding you?
Because, yes. And because...
And then you kind of resent
found
that.
these... Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sort of... Why are you drinking on your own? What's causing this problem? You're obviously not happy.
Yeah.
We've had a really good day and you've ruined it.
Yeah. Okay. Can you recall what time he came to bed?
I didn't. Because I wouldn't let him.
What? So
I
he?
made him sleep on the sofa.
Because you were
'Cause
so
I
angry.
didn't want him anywhere near me.
Because you were so angry.
So angry.
Because he was keeping you out.
Yeah.
And yet you didn't really know what was going on.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So he slept downstairs on the settee.
Yeah.
And then what? What? Tell me the events the next morning. I realise this is.
Wake up for school. We take my daughter to school. Or wake up. And we're sort of pacing around each other.
So you wake up, get the kids up.
Come downstairs.
And where's
but
Ian?
He's here on the settee.
Okay.
He's got up whilst he's hearing us moving around.
Yeah.
So the children aren't aware.
Kids aren't aware. Okay.
They don't know. We have breakfast, but we're both talking to the children, but not to each other.
So it's an icy
Yeah.
standoff.
Yeah.
Okay. Does he say anything to you?
No. He doesn't say a word. I don't say a word to him. He doesn't say a word to me, other than we've got to get these children to school. And I said, we will talk.
Okay.
So we take the children to school. One to school, one to nursery. And then walk home. 10-minute walk in silence.
Which is not the way you'd normally be.
No. So we come in the house. I sit down. Ian's pacing around. And next thing I know, he's got his car keys. And he just said, I'm going out for a walk. And I said, whatever. And that is the last thing I said to him.
And
And he walked out the door.
what time would this?
This was 9 o'clock
9 in the morning.
in the morning.
Kids are at school.
So, yeah.
So he's going out for a walk, but he's got his car keys.
But that wasn't totally unusual because the local park is a 5-minute drive away. So if he'd gone there or he'd gone somewhere else, I wasn't concerned that he'd taken the car.
Okay.
Because every now and again throughout life, you need a bit of space.
Yeah.
Go for a
Of
walk.
course you do. Okay, so you see him drive away.
Yeah.
And then tell me what happens from your point of view.
I'm sat wondering how we're going to sort it out, how we're going to start talking, what on earth has gone off, what's caused all this. I know there's something with work, but I don't know exactly what.
Okay. So from having dropped the kids off at school, you come back, it's a cold, non-communicating walk back home. Within minutes of getting in, about 9 o'clock, Ian says, I'm going to go for a walk, and he takes his car keys, which for you wasn't unusual, because literally there is a park 5-minute drive away. You're still angry with him because you feel excluded, he's shutting you out.
Yeah.
So he goes. Tell me what happens next.
Well, we've got to pick our son up from nursery at 11:30. So I send him a text message to say, you better be there to pick him up.
Okay.
Thinking if he's not aware of time passing, it'll just jolt him back, pull himself together.
So what time would you have sent that, roughly?
I sent a couple during the morning. There'd be one probably about an hour after I left, and one at about 11, 11:15.
Okay, you didn't get a response?
No response at all. No.
Okay, so 11:30 comes.
I pick our son up, angry that he's not there, and send him another text that says, it's a good job somebody cares about him.
Mm-hmm.
Picked him up. He's come home, continued to text him throughout the day, probably once every hour or so, hoping to get a response.
And at what point do you become concerned?
Probably around about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as my daughter's coming home to school, thinking she might say, where's Daddy? Thought Daddy was coming to pick me up. So, how do I explain? Because even I don't know where he is.
Okay.
And I ring my dad at that point to say, can you try and contact him from a phone that his mobile will not recognise?
Yeah.
Because he's obviously not wanting to talk to me for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody can try and contact him, phone, text, whatever. So Dad did try and speak to him. But he got no response.
Okay.
So I keep texting all the time. So we go down to my parents' house, who live local.
You take the kids to your
Take
parents?
the kids there,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're distracted with their cousins.
Yeah.
And there's somebody there just to keep me calm, because I'm starting to really get concerned now. There's been no contact.
And is that unusual, not to have a response?
Not to have a response by this point, yes. Extremely unusual.
Okay. So what happens next?
We try, Dad even sort of tries to search around the local village to see if he can see him, if he's come back and out walking, to see if he can see the car parked up, goes to the park. We can't see it. We keep looking. And then just this real uneasy feeling, sort of about 4 o'clock-ish, 4:30. And I distinctly remember saying to my mum, he's not done anything stupid, has he? And she said, no, don't be daft, he won't have done. So we keep waiting, keep texting, and it gets to sort of about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, I can't remember exactly what time. And I said, I'm going to ring the station and see.
His place of work?
His place of work, and see where he is, see if they've heard anything. So I ring, and one of his colleagues answers the phone and said, not seen hide nor hair of him, he's not due on today. And I'm trying to play it down so that, you know...
Not to give too much away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll keep carrying on. And I'm leaving voicemails for Ian. Where are you? We need you. I'm worried. Talk to me. But nothing at all. And then about 9 o'clock, quarter now, between
9 o'clock in the
and
evening?
1:30 in the evening, the little one, my son's gone to bed, my daughter's still up, and a plain car pulls up. And in it there is a senior supervisor from British Transport Police. There's a DC that Ian had worked with in the past. There is a lady who I don't know, and they all walk in. And I know what it's going to be, because Ian's done this himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, no, not wanted to listen. And all I hear is his voice say, Ian's dead.
Okay.
Ian's dead. And this lady, who I didn't know, sits down next to me, holding me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know at this point how, where, when. And they tell me it's in front of a train.
Mm-hmm.
At Morley, of all places. He did live in Morley when he first started working for the police. So he'd driven up there, and that's all we know. They found his car about a mile from the station. And another ex-colleague of his from Leeds was the one that got called. And that was it. I just, no. Why? What are we going to do?
And was there any kind of message, note, or anything like that?
No, not at that point. There was nothing.
And what was the attitude of the police officers that came?
Well, it was explained to me fairly quickly then that this lady was a police officer with South Yorkshire Police, and she was going to be what's called my family liaison officer.
Mm-hmm.
And she was excellent. She was there as long as I needed her. The senior supervisor, he was talking more to my parents, and the DC that came, I don't know whether it's a man thing, whether they just wanted to distance themselves physically, but they seemed to hang back.
Okay. So, where are the kids at this point?
The kids are actually both in bed now, and all I'm hearing, one voice saying to me, shh, 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 be quiet, don't wake the kids. And it's the DC. Don't wake the kids.
Okay. To carry on, what?
Well, we sat there for a long while. Eventually, my dad and the DC and the senior supervisor went to inform Ian's parents, because I had contacted them during the day without trying to raise any alarm. But they went and told them the news, and then came back to me.
So you kind of find out at about 9 o'clock when this car pulls up with these three officers.
Yeah.
Did they tell you what time the event had occurred?
Not at that point.
When do you find out?
I think it was the next day.
How did you find out?
I think it was Sue, the FLO, the family liaison, that told me.
And what did she say?
That it was at 4:30, which...
And what did that make you feel?
Very angry, because by the time I contacted the station the day before, they knew. They knew.
So what time had you rang into the police station?
I rang. It was somewhere between 5 and 6, from memory. It was certainly after they will have been informed.
So
they knew.
So that by the time you actually ring in at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, the
takes
internet...
another 3 hours, at least. I was livid, because I know, from speaking to Ian about these sort of situations, that that's a priority. Just to inform the family. And
so realistically, from about 4:30, when the incident occurred, till about 9 o'clock, 4.5 hours, and they knew that you were concerned because you'd rang in at 5:30, 6 o'clock. So in that 4.5 hours, they've not told you when.
They've done nothing.
And that makes you angry.
Extremely angry.
Why are you angry?
Because, not that you expect a better service just because he was a policeman, but you expect at least the same level of service. And I know that Ian would make it his priority. If he was faced with that situation, the priority would be to get the information to the family.
And do you know that Ian carried identification at the time?
He always carried his warrant card, so they knew without
Straight
a
away.
shadow of a doubt it was him.
So you feel resentful that they didn't tell you straight away?
Absolutely.
Or within an hour or
Yeah.
so?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in the next day, in the coming days, what was the attitude of the police?
In some respects, they were almost bending over backwards. But my suspicions were there from the first night.
Suspicions? What do you mean by suspicions?
Suspicions that almost like they were trying to cover up. Like,
What were they trying to cover up?
Ian has caused us a huge embarrassment by doing this on railway land.
Yeah.
If he'd walked in front of a car on the motorway, it wouldn't have been their problem. But they were having to deal with it. And it was almost like they got the impression that he was doing it deliberately.
And why do you... So you didn't feel natural empathy from them? You felt that their motives were not...
Their motives were preservation, self-preservation for themselves.
Damage limitation.
Damage limitation.
Okay. And am I right in thinking that as time goes on, you begin to hear more and more clues as to what's been going on? Can you tell me about some of those instances?
I know that Ian had his wallet on him, which had got credit cards, debit cards, and along with his warrant card. I know phone calls were made. The DC said that they'd made phone calls to check into our financial history. They were looking for a reason.
Okay.
And because I said to them, there is nothing. I work for a financial organisation. I know. I run the finances. I know there's nothing untoward. And do not do anything with the cards because I am authorised users on the cards.
And that will cause you a problem.
And that will cause me a problem.
Yeah. And did that happen?
The cards were cancelled.
So even though you said, look, this is going to cause me a bit of a financial hardship in the short term if you cancel the cards, so they still cancelled?
They cancelled them.
Even though they were in your name?
I was embarrassed in the shop. I'd done a week, the weekly shop.
And how soon after his death?
This was less than a week, within 3 or 4 days.
And nobody had said, we're cancelling your cards?
No. So I'm faced at a checkout. The girl says the card's declined.
And did anybody ever explain to you why it was cancelled when you'd said don't do it?
No.
Nobody apologised and said...
I find out by ringing the card company myself that British Transport Police have informed them of Ian's death. So they've cancelled the cards without sight of a death certificate on the say-so of a police officer. That's totally against
But
all protocol.
whose name were the cards in?
It wasn't Ian's name.
But you had joint usage?
Joint usage.
Yeah. So there should have been some kind of thought process before they did that?
Yeah.
Okay, so not something that you enjoyed at that. It was an extra embarrassment.
Yes.
Etc. All right, what other things did you learn in the aftermath?
there was a story put about that Ian had got an illegitimate child.
Okay.
That he was. With
And how
another
did you
woman
hear this rumour?
From another colleague.
One of Ian's colleagues?
One of Ian's colleagues that was concerned that this information was going around when it blatantly was a pack of
And
lies.
do you know where this rumour came from?
I have very strong suspicions. Yes.
But presumably groundless.
Yeah.
But this is another
Absolutely.
thing for you to have to
It's
deal
another
with.
thing, yes.
Okay. Any other things about what was it? What emerged?
Just that they did come to me a couple of days later because they retrieved his mobile phone and interrogated it.
Yeah.
And there was the start of a text message saying that there were voices in his head that he got to stop. And he never sent that.
And who was that destined for?
We think it was me.
Okay.
But
And when they found his car, was there anything found in his car?
there was piles and piles of paperwork, case files that Ian was working.
So official police files?
Yeah. Now this was not Ian at all. Work was left at work, home was home. Never did he bring anything home because he's not authorised to do so, and he didn't. There was no need to. So I had no idea. When they found the car, they've looked in the car, they've looked for a note.
Yeah.
And come across this pile of paperwork.
Okay, and why do you think he had the files in there?
There must have been things that weren't being handled on there, but he's obviously not felt able.
So he wasn't
anybody.
he wasn't coping at that point?
No.
And kind of hiding it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And what response were you getting from the police, the British Transport Police, with regards to what you now believe was an important fact of the figures culture?
They clammed up. They don't want to tell me anything. They're trying to look.
Were you asking questions?
Yes, I was asking, why and what's all this paperwork? Why on earth is nobody taking him to task on it? But you're not getting any information back.
And were you receiving any kind of communications from senior officers?
On the 28th of June, I had a visit from the area commander.
Okay, this would be a superintendent. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Who was new in post that day.
Okay.
So he wasn't even in post at
And
the
didn't
time
even
that
know
he
him.
died.
Okay.
Never had the courtesy of any contact from the outgoing area commander. Nothing whatsoever.
Okay.
The only regular contact was from the family liaison officer, who was South Yorkshire appointed. She was fantastic. I could call on her any time, day or night. The DC did say I could contact him, but to be honest, I didn't want to, because I felt that he wasn't working for me so much as trying to gain insight into, try and dig dirt up on us to see if he could
And
find
what
any
gave you that impression?
body language for a large part.
Describe that to me.
He didn't always want to make eye contact. Sort of almost apologetic for being here, for being near me. Because if he was working for the police to try and get information, then
And did that officer know Ian personally?
he did. So he should never have been put in that position.
No, I agree. Okay. So when does the funeral take place?
That was a week later.
And where was that?
That was at Eckington.
And what police involvement was there in
I did invite anybody who wanted to attend, and did request that if they attended, because not knowing all the circumstances at the time, I request they attended in uniform, which they did, and a coach was put on for those from Leeds who Ian had worked with to attend, which they did.
And what about senior officers or supervisors?
His supervisor was there.
Is this the sergeant who
sent
the email?
Issues with, yes.
The impersonal email.
Who was in self-congratulatory mode with his other colleagues because he'd just found out he'd been made an inspector. So he's having a great day out, duty commitment.
How do you know that he'd received that news?
I found out a couple of days after, but
But when you saw him at the funeral, what was his demeanour?
Couldn't make eye contact. He never came near me.
And this is his supervisor?
This is his supervisor. They stood a line, sort of guard of honour, going into church, and he was in there, and that's the closest he came to me.
So let me just get this absolutely crystal clear. So his boss, his immediate supervisor, was a sergeant who was in charge of British Transport Police, all officers at Sheffield Railway Station, with probably 15 officers under his care, something like that?
Not about a dozen, I think.
Yeah, okay, a dozen.
Yeah.
But he was the supervisor and he was responsible for that police station. And you're saying to me, up until from the point of his death, Ian's death, to the funeral a week later, you'd had no communication whatsoever from his immediate supervisor. In charge of the police station,
none.
One of his men had just killed himself.
Yeah.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, angry is a slight understatement.
Yeah. So when you saw him at the funeral, how did that make you feel?
Because I didn't know all the circumstances at the time, I put my hand out to him to sort of acknowledge him. But he never came near me. At the wake afterwards, he never approached me. Never came near me. Now, there were officers that did, officers that had worked with Ian, who I didn't personally know. They identified themselves to me and said, I worked with Ian at such and such, at such and such a period. Really sorry.
So all the natural things that you would kind of expect.
Yeah.
So a lot of officers were fine, decent, made themselves known to you,
yes,
and gave their apologies, etc., etc. But not the supervisor.
No.
What about some of the colleagues that you did know? Did any of them say anything that was relevant?
They were just offering their sympathies, and they were very supportive. They couldn't understand how it had come to this. But then, this is on the day of the funeral. As you move forward, you start to speak to people. You start to hear a bit more.
So tell me about that. And what did you begin to hear in the days and weeks, months afterwards?
That they'd seen Ian was struggling at work. That
this is his colleague.
This is
some of his colleagues
at Sheffield. Ian would regularly turn up to work early.
Yeah.
Half an hour, 40 minutes early was not unusual.
Yeah.
And if he did, he would say to the off-going shift, if you want, I'll book you off.
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah.
I can have a flyer. Finish. Have a flyer.
Yeah.
And of course they took advantage of it. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, of course they would.
But so he was leaving home here roughly an hour before he was due to start work. But that was Ian's routine.
And he'd done that for a long time?
He'd done that as long as I've known him.
Okay.
So he was. That never varied. He never ever left work home later. It was always roughly 40 minutes an hour before he was due at work. But I find out afterwards that he was turning up on the dot. And when quizzed, because a couple of occasions people said that he looked absolutely dreadful.
Yeah.
That he'd not shaved, that he looked sort of a bit unkempt.
Yeah.
and asked him what's the matter, and his response one time was, "I don't want to go in. I've been walking around the
So
car
he
park."
physically said this to one of his colleagues?
Yeah, and he'd been walking around the car park for half an hour and didn't want to go in.
And how soon prior to the event was it?
This was within the month before.
Okay.
But this particular colleague, immediately went to the supervisor and said, "There's a problem with Ian. You need to speak to Ian. He's out there now."
So this colleague who was concerned, do you want to name him?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, but this officer told you that because he'd seen Ian in a bad way and he was so concerned, after having that conversation that Ian was saying he didn't want to come in, that he's told you that he had personally gone through to the sergeant, his supervisor in charge of the police station, and reported that there's a problem with Ian.
Yeah.
But presumably nothing was done.
Do you want the response?
No, go on.
Don't give a flying fuck about Ian. He's going to Donny soon.
And this is hearsay.
Yeah.
But basically, the colleague, is saying that when he told the supervisor says, "I don't give a flying fuck because Ian's going to Donny." And yet, really, what the officer was doing was flagging it up as he should do to his supervisor.
Absolutely.
Concern, welfare for a colleague,
Yeah.
along the lines of this might
Needs
do
help.
something, help, or he might do something silly. And that was the response.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that officer was sincere with that comment?
He's got no reason not to be.
Okay. And when you heard that, how did that make you feel?
Even angrier. Because the signs were there. His own partner had, when Ian had been upset one time, had actually contacted another sergeant, because the supervising officer wasn't on shift.
Yeah.
Contacted another sergeant and said, "Ian's really upset. I don't think he should be here." And his
So when you say
partner-
Ian's partner, you mean work colleague?
Work colleague, yeah.
Is this
The
male or
person
female?
who works with this colleague,
Was this a male officer or a female?
a female officer.
So a female officer, again, raised concerns.
Yeah. On 2 different occasions.
So we've got one male officer
Yeah.
mention it to the supervisor approximately a month prior,
Mhm.
and then there's a female colleague
Yeah.
who raises it on 2
At
occasions
least 2 occasions.
in the days prior.
Yeah.
And as far as you're aware, nothing is done.
Nothing's done. He's told, "Sit down and have a cup of tea." Because Ian had self-referred himself to occupational health.
How long was that before?
That was about a month before.
And how did you know that?
Because he was attending, he got appointments booked.
But did he tell you this?
See.
So he had told you that he'd referred himself to occupational health,
Yeah.
which is the standard welfare channel,
Yeah.
as it were.
Yeah.
And what was the attitude of occupational health when he self-referred?
I don't know, because I didn't want to pry and put him under pressure, just other than, "How do you feel about that?" "Yeah, good, I want to, see somebody else."
So he obviously was aware that he was having a problem, and did seek
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
But you don't know what constructive things were discussed
No.
or said.
I didn't at that time. Obviously, after
What did you find out later?
I found out that he'd been asked to sign a non-suicidal pact,
Okay.
and that they were just discussing, although I've not got much detail, that they were discussing the issues that he was having at work and coping mechanisms.
Okay, so he'd had, do you know how many sessions?
2.
So he'd had 2 sessions. But you're saying that, as you understand it now, that one of those 2 sessions, he did sign a non-suicide pact.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a non-suicide pact.
Basically, just agreement that if you're feeling that bad,
Don't do anything silly.
talk. go seek the help out.
Presumably that's a standard
I believe so.
procedure. Okay. All right. So let me just clarify things. So from Ian dying to the funeral, there's no communication from the supervisor who's in charge of him.
No.
Does, in time for the funeral, is there any kind of card, flowers sent to you?
We'd had flowers. Now I can't think if it was my work or not. There were some flowers, and I can't remember if they were at the graveside. But that was the only.
But you never received any kind of sympathy card from supervisors?
No.
Did you think you should have?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that the force really should have been a bit more personal?
Absolutely.
And a bit more
One
caring?
of their colleagues has taken his own life.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be questions there, but their immediate thing should be
Look after you
us.
and the children.
Yeah.
And you didn't feel as if you got that level of support?
No. No.
Okay, as time goes on, because of the circumstances, an inquest will have been opened and adjourned.
Yeah.
How long was it before the actual full inquest took place?
The full inquest took place in March 2008, so that's almost 2 years.
And what was the reason for the delay?
British Transport Police.
Explain what that means.
I was in contact with the coroner and the coroner's officers to find out what was happening, and they were saying that they were waiting for information from British Transport Police. When I've quizzed senior supervisors, area commanders at meetings that I've requested, and that's the only time they've attended is at my request, then there's flannel. It's just firefighting. Oh, we're waiting for this, we're waiting for that. It does take a long time. It was patronising. It takes a while for these things to happen. We want to do it properly.
But did you feel that a year and 9 months is a rather excessive length of time?
Yeah, extremely. Because I know for a fact that the vast majority of the statements were taken within days.
Okay. I mean, they are lengthy processes, but nothing should last over a year.
No.
And why do you think, personally, that there was a delay?
I think they didn't want the potential for blame to be laid at their door.
And blame them of what?
Ian's death.
And how could they be blamed?
Because they didn't look out for him. They didn't give him support when he needed it, when he was asking, when he self-referred. There were so many opportunities for intervention, and they failed.
And at the heart of it, what do you think the root cause of Ian's demise?
The relationship with his supervisor and the lack of support, the fact that, well, there was no relationship, yet he's having to report in to this guy. And
so the main the main causation factor would still be the figures and these performance targets.
Yeah.
Now, just in the period during this period from his time of his death to almost 2 years later, you'd obviously learnt a lot of things in that interim period of time. Did you discuss the figures culture with any senior officers?
More with colleagues than senior officers, because in our case it's already too late. You know, I did sort of say, you know, why were you doing this? But again, they were sort of trying
Are these the meetings that you organised?
I organised.
That you preempted?
That, yes.
And where were those meetings taking place?
They were held at our house.
So And who would come and visit you to have these
We had
meetings?
a Federation rep who was also a colleague of Ian's from Sheffield.
Yeah.
We had the area commander who wasn't imposed at the time of his death.
Yeah.
We had the detective sergeant that was coordinating the collation
inquiry.
of everything.
Yeah.
And the FLO from South Yorkshire and a self-appointed FLO from British Transport Police who was the DC.
Who knew it?
Now they went all there at every meeting. Sue, my
How many
FLO,
meetings would you say you had here?
There were two.
So 2.
There was one at the end of June 2006.
Yeah.
And
So that's literally a few weeks after it died.
yeah. And at my insistence, there was one at the end of September 2006.
Okay, and did you discuss the issue of the figures culture?
Not at those points.
Okay. Later on, did you discuss it with any senior officer about figures had been at the heart of?
Not with senior officers.
But colleagues were basically saying, what
Colleagues
about
were.
the figures?
Yeah.
What were they saying?
Yeah. That they were unachievable. That Ian wasn't the only person struggling to meet the targets. Everybody was out for themselves, and it was very much people cherry picking the jobs for the points, for the figures. If there was nothing in it, it was getting left.
Right, so it's all about achieving tick boxes.
Absolutely.
And what do you feel about that kind of target system?
That's not the way to run a police force.
Why?
Because it's not about checking off boxes. It's about being there for the public to maintain the law and order and intervene where necessary. And this stop search was not necessary. It was a government thing as well.
Were you aware that actually it was then outlawed at one point?
No.
It was.
That-
It was deemed an inappropriate use of the wrong form.
Really?
Yes.
There you go then.
Yeah, it was withdrawn because they said it was misuse of that. Because basically you should only be stopping who you suspect are terrorists.
Absolutely.
And they weren't.
That was
And it was a culture that said, let's just get figures and I can verify.
Yeah.
Okay, but it was withdrawn because
Right.
it was deemed a misuse. And all forces were doing it. I think BTP
Right.
were quite bad as well.
Yeah.
All right, so a year and 9 months later, we get to an inquest.
Mm-hmm.
What does Mr. Hinchliffe, who was the coroner, say about what he ultimately thought was the causation factor?
He said that he thought that Ian's mind was, and he used the word beset, with bad thoughts, that his mind, he wasn't in the right place mentally, that it was the work was causing the issues.
But what specifically about work?
The targets. Pure
So
and
he
simple.
actually said
Yeah.
in his summing up,
Yeah.
because he recorded a verdict of suicide,
Yes.
but he remarked
Yeah.
that one of the causation factors was
Yeah.
the overuse of targets, etc., etc. And did that bring you any comfort to hear him say that?
It confirmed what I knew at that stage. And it sort of, comfort's the wrong word, because there'll never be comfort. But it underscored that there is a serious issue here, and we don't want it happening to anybody else.
And at the inquest, did senior officers give evidence? Testimony?
Yes, his supervisor.
This is the supervisor who
this
never
is-
made any contact with you?
Yes. This is the one that Ian was required to report
to, yeah.
and he couldn't even make eye contact with me that day. He couldn't wait to get out of the room.
What about any other officers, senior officers?
There was, I'm trying to recall now, there were a couple of others in there, but I believe that they were noting down and reporting back to senior officers at area
So they didn't
headquarters.
actually give testimony. They were just there
They were there.
making notes of what
Yeah.
was occurring.
Mm.
Okay, so
Some of his colleagues gave evidence.
same one.
Police constables, just confirming that they'd witnessed Ian struggling and that they tried to raise.
So they reported during the actual giving testimony at the
Yeah.
coroner's court that they had actually said to the supervisor.
Yeah. His partner, that he worked with all the time.
Yeah.
She was there for a while, speaking to the coroner, and
So at least 2 witnesses, police officers, colleagues,
Yeah.
gave testimony during
On the
the inquest,
Yeah.
saying that basically they'd flagged it up to supervision
Yeah.
that Ian was struggling, and yet nothing was
Yeah.
apparently done.
Yeah.
Okay, and at the end of the inquest, did you have any communication from the BTP afterwards?
No,
Have you had any?
They were too busy getting their press release out that they are the caring, sharing BTP.
And how did that make you feel?
Livid. They're just, in my mind, they're underscoring what they are, and then they don't care for anybody but themselves.
So you feel that a lot of this was about trying to damage limitation?
Yes, they couldn't wash their hands of us quick enough.
And that's how you felt?
Absolutely. We're an annoyance. By the time of the inquest, almost 2 years later, they're hoping we've gone away.
So from your point of view, you really don't think the British Transport Police dealt with you very well?
No,
as the
not at all.
victim of a
Not at all.
colleague, of one of their own
No.
employees?
There was obviously a diary card to contact me on the 3rd anniversary of Ian's death,
Okay.
which was a letter basically saying, it must have been a difficult time. We'll leave you now to move forward with your life.
So this is in 2009?
Yes.
So you don't get anything between 2006 to 2009?
No, not unless I've specifically requested, or it's been colleagues who are friends. So they're not in an official capacity at all. There's been 2 or 3 colleagues that have kept in touch.
And at any time, have you had any kind of official apology, almost, to say, we're sorry that Ian died?
They wouldn't dare phrase it that way.
So you've not had any kind of communication at all?
There's been an expression of sympathy, but not...
And when did that come?
Because it was so insignificant, I can barely recall.
But is this relatively
it
soon afterwards?
It was soon afterwards, but I think again that was almost like, right, we have this checklist, we
Must
better
write a
do
letter.
this, we better do that, we better do that.
So all in all, how would you describe your experience of being dealt with by the BTP?
Atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. I wouldn't wish it on anybody else. It couldn't have been mishandled anywhere worse.
Okay.
I believed, you hear all these stories that when you're in the police force, they look after you and your families.
Yeah.
I've yet to witness that, and it's now 2013.
So 7 years
7
and 1
years.
month after Ian's death,
Yeah.
you still feel very much shortchanged
Absolutely.
and disillusioned
Yeah.
with your treatment.
They took my husband.
So you still, all this time later, believe that the figures culture
Yeah.
was directly responsible,
Yeah.
and the lack of decent supervision
Yes,
when things were flagged up.
absolutely.
Okay. And am I right in thinking that you wear Ian's ring round your neck? Do you want to tell me about that?
That's Ian's wedding ring, which obviously he had for the 8 years and 2 weeks that we were married.
Okay.
And obviously it was taken from him along with his warrant card and
his possessions at the time.
All his possessions at the time of his death. And immediately I said that I want this back because it's mine.
Personal. Yeah.
It's not yours, it's mine.
Yeah.
And it took, I think it was nearly 3 weeks.
So despite you saying straight away...
Yeah, there was no need for them to hang on to it. Record the fact that...
How many times did you ask for that ring, Matt?
At least 3 times.
And yet it took 3 weeks? Yeah. When really they could have just took a photograph.
It could have been there.
And you could have had it back the next day.
I wanted it for the funeral.
Yeah.
And I didn't have it.
So again, it's another little thing that sticks in your throat.
It's another demonstration of the lack of care.
And how are the kids coping now?
They're doing absolutely fantastic, but more so because that's their temperament.
Yeah.
But our son, he doesn't know his dad. He's only got second-hand memories.
Yeah.
My daughter, she's now 13, and she doesn't remember everything. And I have to say to her, every little thing that you can remember, no matter how silly, you must write it down.
So you don't forget.
Because we've got nothing else. And that's awful for any child to grow up without a parent. We've got photographs and they're all round at home. We talk about Daddy all the time and he's a big part of our lives. But he's not here. He can't go to school presentations.
Yeah. So the hurt still continues?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it always will. And with their ages, I'm going to have to go through this time and time and time again, because we've always exercised honesty with them both about anything in life.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you can only give it in terms relevant to their age.
Yeah. So as they get older, they'll naturally ask questions.
They will ask more. So at every time you discuss it, you're opening the wound up again. It's like it's happening again.
And how have you coped?
One foot in front of the other. You get up in the morning, you deal with the day in front of you, and you go to bed. Sometimes it's 1 hour at a time. Obviously, you establish new routines because nothing is ever normal again. What's normal? Nothing's normal about this situation. So we have a new normal, and day to day, we're doing all right. We've got family, and we've got friends, and that's it. And I can't fault any of them. They're there 100% behind us. They understand. Nobody can understand what's happened, but they're there for us. I don't have to ask, and they have an understanding.
Yeah.
But as regards official support, there has been none. There was none before Ian died, and there's been virtually none since.
Now, in April of 2013, I launched what I think should be the national website for police officers and stress, called policepressure.co.uk, and you agreed to be interviewed for the BBC, and John Cundine, you did a piece and you told part of your story there. Yeah. But obviously, TV time and live TV, you can only do it like a 3-minute segment. Yeah. I appreciate, from my point of view, that you have agreed to do this today, because I think it needs to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
it's a side of policing that nobody talks about, and it's clearly still not right.
No, it's not.
And the fact that all these years later you still feel basically shortchanged by the force is not good.
No.
And I think it needs to be highlighted, and whether it's this force
Yeah.
or any other force, whether it's endemic of all forces, it needs to be told. So I appreciate you going on camera for me today. And would you give me permission to put this up on the police pressure website?
We've got to stop anybody else getting remotely close to this situation.
Police pressure was created because, one, I knew Ian as a colleague. I went to your wedding, and I remember looking after his big Dulux dog for a week when he went on holiday. While he was at Morley, so I knew him when he had the house at Morley. And he was a lovely lad. So I think it's an important story that needs to be told of a different side of policing. Because surely everybody can empathise with the situation you found yourself in. And in reality it was made worse by the actions of police officers, when really they should have been much more caring and supportive.
Absolutely.
So I think that needs to be highlighted. The pressure website was created as a resource centre for police officers. Do you want to say anything about that? About the creation of the website?
Well, I just think it's fantastic that you've done it, because there does need to be that outlet for people that feel they can't turn to the supervisors for whatever reason.
There needs to be some kind of pressure valve,
doesn't there?
Some other route.
Exactly, it's that pressure cooker effect.
Yeah.
And we've got to avoid that for anybody else. But they don't have to be feeling as low as Ian was. Just any pressure within the job, there's got to be that outlet.
Yeah.
Another avenue.
Yeah.
And this will help.
Well, I certainly appreciate you going on camera, and I appreciate the fact that we've talked about some very difficult things. But I think it needed to be said.
Absolutely. It's not easy.
No.
It's not easy, but if it stops anybody else...
If it stops one person, it's a success.
That's it, exactly. It's just that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Nicola, thank you very much.